The war had been raging for 127 years. Across the vastness of space, fleets clashed, planets burned, and civilizations crumbled under the weight of an unending conflict. The Galactic Coalition, an alliance of more than 50 species, had been fighting against the Tsalvoth Dominion for over a century. The Tsalvoth were a warlike species, towering reptilian creatures with thick armored skin and a hunger for conquest. They knew nothing but war. They lived for it. At first, the Coalition had hope. They believed their advanced strategies and strong alliances would stop the Tsalvoth. But they were wrong. No matter how hard they fought, the Tsalvoth adapted. Every countermeasure, every tactic, every defense, the Tsalvoth found a way to break through. They were relentless. The war had reached a point where neither side could claim victory, but the Tsalvoth were slowly winning. One by one, planets fell. The Coalition was running out of resources. Their best generals had been lost. Their most advanced fleets had been destroyed. Desperation spread across the alliance like a disease. If they lost this war, it would not just be the end of the Coalition. It would be the end of freedom in the galaxy. And so, in their moment of greatest need, the Coalition turned to the one species they had ignored for decades: humanity. The forgotten species. Humans were different from the other races in the Coalition. They were newcomers to the galactic stage, having only discovered space travel a few hundred years ago. Compared to the ancient civilizations of the Coalition, humans were young, inexperienced, and untested. But there was another reason the Coalition had never asked for their help before. Humans were strange. They were smaller and weaker than most species. Their technology was advanced but unpredictable. Their military records showed brutal efficiency, but the way they fought was unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen. Humans did not follow rules. They used deception, speed, and overwhelming force in ways that confused other species. The Coalition saw this as reckless and dangerous. But now they had no choice. The desperate plea. A meeting was called on Turian 5, the last major Coalition stronghold before the Tsalvoth reached the Central Worlds. Ambassadors from dozens of species gathered in the Grand War Chamber, a massive circular hall where the fate of the galaxy would be decided. Admiral Vex of the Tyranny race, a species known for their cold logic, stood before the assembly. His voice was calm, but the desperation in his words was clear. We are losing this war. The Tsalvoth cannot be stopped with our current strategies. We need a new approach. We need the humans. The room fell silent. For years, the Coalition had avoided involving humanity. Some feared their unpredictable nature. Others looked down on them for being young and unrefined. But now, none of that mattered. The Tsalvoth were winning. A holographic screen flickered to life, showing a live transmission from Earth's High Command. The face of Admiral Vasquez, the Supreme Commander of Earth's military forces, appeared on the screen. She was a human in her late 40s, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face calm but unreadable. Behind her stood other high-ranking human officers, watching with quiet intensity. You need our help, Vasquez said simply. Admiral Vex nodded. Yes, if humanity does not join this war, we will all fall. Vasquez was silent for a moment. The humans exchanged glances, speaking in hushed voices. The Coalition leaders expected a long debate. They expected humans to ask for negotiations, agreements, contracts. Instead, Vasquez turned back to the screen and said, "Send us everything you have. Maps, fleet positions, enemy weaknesses. We start now." The Coalition leaders were stunned. No hesitation. No conditions, just action. The ambassadors whispered among themselves. The Xelari, an insectoid race known for their careful planning, chittered nervously. The Solari, a race of crystalline beings, exchanged glowing signals in confusion. Even Admiral Vex, always calm, was caught off guard. One ambassador finally spoke. You don't want time to prepare." Vasquez smiled slightly. We've been prepared. The only question was when. The war takes a new turn. Within hours, human warships were mobilized. The coalition watched in disbelief as Earth's entire military machine went into motion at a speed no other race could match. The humans did not waste time with ceremony or discussion. They did not overanalyze. They studied the battlefield, adapted instantly, and took control of the entire war effort like they had been waiting for this moment. For 127 years, the coalition had fought the Xalvoth in long, drawn-out battles. They used measured tactics, defensive formations, and diplomatic strategies. Humans did none of that. They hacked into Xalvoth communications within minutes. They built new war plans in hours, not weeks. They prepared weapons the coalition had never seen before. And when one coalition general asked how long it would take for humans to turn the tide of war, Admiral Vasquez looked at him with calm confidence and said, "Give us 5 hours." The coalition leaders stared in shock. 5 hours. For 127 years, the war had dragged on with no end in sight. And yet, the humans spoke as if victory was already decided. And maybe, just maybe, it was. The Galactic Coalition had expected a slow response. For years, they had seen humans as outsiders, a young species that was still learning its place in the universe. Every other civilization in the coalition took weeks, even months, to prepare for war. There were meetings, debates, and long discussions before any decision was made. But humanity, they moved within minutes. The unstoppable machine. As soon as the request for help was accepted, Earth's military machine roared to life. Thousands of warships, hidden in deep space shipyards, powered up at once. Factories on Mars, Titan, and the lunar colony switched to full wartime production. Fleets, soldiers, drones, and AI-driven war machines were mobilized at a speed the coalition had never seen before. The coalition ambassadors watched in shock as Earth's high command analyzed 127 years of war data in under an hour. Admiral Vasquez stood in the center of the war room, surrounded by holographic projections of enemy positions. Her officers worked in perfect harmony, exchanging rapid-fire orders. They were not discussing if they could win. They were deciding how. She turned to the coalition leaders. "You've been fighting this war with honor. That's your problem." Admiral Vex, the coalition's highest-ranking strategist, frowned. "What do you mean?" Vasquez gestured to a star map. "You fight like politicians. You follow the rules of war, hoping the enemy will do the same. You play defense, waiting for the Xalvoth to tire out. But they don't. They adapt. They survive. And you let them." The room fell silent. The truth hurt. The Xalvoth had survived this long because the coalition was playing by outdated rules. The humans had no intention of doing the same. Vasquez pointed at the map again. "You've been trying to win this war the right way. We're going to win it the fast way." The first strike. The attack came exactly 1 hour after humanity joined the war. While the coalition gathered their fleets and debated battle formations, human warships had already launched their first wave of attacks. The Xalvoth did not even see them coming. A stealth squadron of Earth's fastest ships bypassed the enemy front lines and attacked 3 key supply stations deep in Xalvoth territory. These stations had remained untouched for decades. No coalition fleet had ever reached that far without being detected. But humans, they didn't play fair. By the time that Xalvoth realized what was happening, the stations were already burning. Every fuel reserve, weapon cache, and reinforcement point was destroyed in the blink of an eye. It was a surgical strike, executed with absolute precision. The Xalvoth War Council was in chaos. Their leader, Supreme Warlord Karath, slammed his massive fist against the control panel. "Who did this?" he roared. His generals looked at the reports in disbelief. Humans. The word itself felt almost laughable. Until today, humans have been nothing more than an afterthought, a primitive species the Xalvoth barely considered worth conquering. Now, within the first hour of their involvement, humanity had crippled the Dominion's supply network. And they were just getting started. The second wave, cyber warfare. While the first strike left the Xalvoth scrambling, humanity unleashed a second attack, one they never saw coming. Cyber warfare. For over a century, the Xalvoth and the Coalition had fought with physical weapons, ships, fleets, armies. But humans, they understood that the deadliest battles didn't always happen on the battlefield. Within minutes, Earth's AI-driven hacking systems infiltrated the Xalvoth Dominion's entire communication network. Military orders were altered. Enemy ships were given false coordinates. Entire fleet movements were disrupted. Some Xalvoth commanders even received fake surrender messages, leading to total confusion within their ranks. In a war that had lasted 127 years, no species had ever attempted something like this. The Xalvoth commanders began firing on their own ships, thinking they had been infiltrated. In the span of 2 hours, the Dominion had lost more ships to friendly fire and confusion than they had in the past 10 years of battle. And all the humans had to do was sit back and watch the chaos unfold. The third hour, the fear begins. By hour 3, the Xalvoth knew something terrible had happened. For the first time in their history, they were losing. Not just losing, being torn apart. They had faced strong enemies before. The Coalition had given them trouble in the past, but they had always found a way to adapt. This was different. This was not a war. This was an extermination. Reports flooded in from every front. Xalvoth warships were exploding without warning. Entire battalions vanished before they even reached the battlefield. Their own machines were turning against them. The Xalvoth generals did not understand. They had always fought strong enemies, but humanity was something else. They didn't just fight. They dominated. The fourth hour, the message. On the fourth hour of the war, Admiral Vasquez sent a simple message to the Xalvoth War Council. A hologram of the human admiral flickered to life in their command center. She looked calm, unbothered, as if she had already won. "Your war is over," she said. "You just don't know it yet." The Xalvoth warlord bared his sharp teeth in anger. "We will never surrender," he growled. Vasquez only smiled. "You won't have a choice." Then, without another word, she cut the transmission. Seconds later, a Xalvoth dreadnought, one of their largest warships, exploded in orbit. They had not even detected an attack. The Xalvoth War Council stared in horror. They had made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. They should have never let the humans into this war. Because now, the war belonged to humanity. The war had raged for 127 years, but it took humanity only 4 hours to break the Xalvoth's spine. Across the galaxy, the impossible was happening. Xalvoth warships were falling out of formation, their fleets in complete disarray. Entire battalions were retreating without firing a single shot. Their communication lines were corrupted, their systems hacked, their generals lost in chaos. For the first time in their long history of war, the Xalvoth were afraid. And humanity. They were just getting started. Hour 5. The trap closes. Admiral Vasquez stood at the center of Earth's War Command, watching the battlefield unfold on a massive holographic display. She could see everything. Their ships, the enemy fleets, the paths of destruction they had left behind. Every movement, every outcome, every possibility. A young officer turned to her. "Admiral, the Xalvoth main fleet is still trying to regroup near Sector Theta 9. They don't know we've already taken their reinforcement points." Vasquez gave a small nod. "Perfect. Cut off their escape routes. Push them into the kill zone." The order was sent. Human warships, fast and precise, moved like a blade through the battlefield, cutting off every possible retreat. The Xalvoth, desperate to escape, walked right into the trap. The final battle begins. The Tsalvov had gathered their largest remaining fleet in a desperate attempt to turn the tide. Over 1,200 warships, heavily armed, stood in formation near the planet Zorthal, ready for a final stand. They knew they had no choice. If they lost here, their entire empire would collapse. Warlord Karath, leader of the Tsalvov Dominion, stood aboard his command ship, clenching his claws in frustration. "We will not fall," he growled. "Prepare for battle. If we are to die, we will take as many of them with us as we can." But then something happened that no Tsalvov had ever experienced before. Silence. No human fleet appeared. No enemy ships jumped into the system. For 10 long minutes, there was nothing but an eerie, unsettling quiet. The Tsalvov warriors waited, gripping their weapons, watching their screens. Where was the attack? Where was the enemy? Then, without warning, their ship's systems shut down. One by one, their engines flickered off. Their shields powered down. Their weapons stopped working. Panic spread through the fleet. "What is happening?" Karath roared. And then, the humans arrived. A war unlike any other. Thousands of human stealth ships materialized out of nowhere. They had been waiting, invisible, hidden inside the system, watching the Tsalvov gather like cattle for slaughter. Then, with their systems still offline, the attack began. Missiles and energy blasts ripped through the Tsalvov fleet like a storm of death. Enemy warships, unable to move or fight back, exploded one after another. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted only 20 minutes. By the end, more than 90% of the Tsalvov fleet was destroyed. Only one ship remained. The final warning. Admiral Vasquez appeared as a hologram aboard Warlord Karath's ship. The once mighty Tsalvov leader, now defeated and broken, glared at her with fury in his glowing red eyes. "How?" he growled. "How could you? How could you destroy us so easily?" Vasquez tilted her head. "Because we don't play fair." Karath's claws trembled. "You fight like monsters." The Admiral smiled slightly. "No, we fight to win." A long silence stretched between them. Then, Vasquez leaned forward. "Surrender, Warlord, or your species will not survive the next hour." The Warlord looked around, seeing the wreckage of his once great fleet. He knew the truth. The Tsalvov Dominion had ruled through fear and strength, but now, they were nothing. For the first time in his life, Warlord Karath felt true defeat. And with a heavy voice, he spoke the words that no Tsalvov had ever said before. "We surrender. The war ends." The message was broadcast across the galaxy. After 127 years, the war was over. The Coalition celebrated. Planets that had lived in fear for over a century rejoiced. The name humanity was spoken with both awe and terror. And on Earth, Admiral Vasquez watched the stars, knowing one simple truth. Humanity had not just won the war. They had changed the galaxy forever. The war was over. For 127 years, the Tsalvov Dominion had ruled through fear and destruction. Their fleets had burned worlds, their warriors had crushed civilizations, and their name had spread terror across the galaxy. But in just 5 hours, humanity had ended it all. Now, the galaxy stood in shock. The Coalition's disbelief. On the capital planet of the Galactic Coalition, the grand halls of the Senate were filled with chaos. Leaders from hundreds of species shouted over one another. Some were celebrating, while others were terrified. Ambassador Rylos, a reptilian diplomat from the Vorka Republic, slammed his 3-fingered hand on the table. "This is impossible. 5 hours. How can this be?" A feathered Yilzar senator shook his head, his sharp eyes filled with unease. "I do not know, but the war is over. The Tsalvov have surrendered to the humans." The room fell silent. That was the real problem. The Tsalvov had been the greatest threat to the galaxy for over a century. No one had ever truly defeated them. Until now. And the ones who did it, a species that had only been part of the galactic stage for 50 years. The Coalition had always viewed humans as a minor power, young, inexperienced, unproven. Now they had proven something terrifying. They were stronger than anyone had imagined, the fear of a new power. Among the senators, not everyone was happy. Ambassador Gorthak, a thick-skinned, four-armed Bruvax warrior, crossed his arms. The humans did not just defeat the Xalvoth, he growled. They destroyed them. A small insectoid diplomat clicked its mandibles in agreement. They did not fight a war. They executed an extermination. The room buzzed with uneasy whispers. Many had believed the war would last another century. The Coalition had been prepared to slowly push the Xalvoth back, to negotiate, to struggle for every inch of ground. But the humans had ended it in hours. If they could do that to the Xalvoth, what could they do to the rest of the galaxy? Humanity's silence. While the Coalition debated, humanity remained silent. The fleets that had shattered the Xalvoth did not move toward conquest. They did not demand rewards or claim new territories. Instead, they simply waited. Admiral Vasquez stood aboard Earth's flagship, watching the galactic news broadcasts. Every channel was filled with speculation, theories, and above all, fear. The galaxy was afraid of humanity now. She turned to her officers. "What's the situation on the Xalvoth homeworld?" A young lieutenant responded. "Total surrender, Admiral. Their government has collapsed. The remaining warlords are turning themselves in." Vasquez nodded. "Good. Begin stabilization efforts. No retaliation. No massacres. We're not conquerors." The officer hesitated. "But Admiral, the Coalition fears us. Should we send a message?" Vasquez thought for a moment. Then she smiled. "No, let them wonder. The Xalvoth's fate. On the Xalvoth homeworld, once the center of a brutal empire, a new reality was setting in. The once proud warlords, who had commanded fleets and armies, now stood in chains. The great cities that had once produced weapons of war were now under human control. But there were no executions, no revenge. Instead, human officers restored order. They'd rebuilt infrastructure, delivered aid, and established a temporary government to ensure stability. It was not an occupation. It was a warning. The galaxy had expected humans to be ruthless conquerors, but instead, they had chosen mercy. And somehow, that was even more terrifying. A silent message. Back in the Coalition Senate, the debates raged on. Some wanted to thank humanity. Others wanted to investigate them. A few even whispered about preparing for war, in case humanity turned its attention elsewhere. But then, a simple message arrived from Earth's government. It contained no threats, no demands, just a single sentence. "The war is over. We will return home." And just like that, the human fleets began to leave. No empire building, no conquests, no ultimatums, just victory and silence. The galaxy had expected a monster. Instead, it had found something far worse. A power that could destroy worlds, but chose not to. And now, every species had the same question in their minds. What happens when the next enemy appears? Because now, everyone knew. If humanity entered a war, they wouldn't just win. They would end it. The war had ended. Humanity had defeated the Xalvoth in just 5 hours, shattering an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for over a century. But instead of conquering new worlds, they had simply left. No one could understand why. Across the galaxy, leaders, generals, and scientists all asked the same question. What do the humans really want? The Senate's dilemma. On the capital planet of the Galactic Coalition, the Senate was still in chaos. Ambassador Rylos, the Vorker diplomat, paced back and forth in frustration. "This doesn't make sense. No species fights a war this efficiently and then just walks away." Senator Yilzor, the feathered representative from the Avian Confederacy, shook his head. Perhaps they only wanted to stop the Xalvath. Maybe they aren't interested in ruling. Ambassador Gorthak, the massive Bruvax warrior, let out a deep growl. That is exactly what makes them dangerous. A conqueror wants something. A warrior only fights when necessary. The second option is far worse. The Senate chamber fell silent. Humanity had not demanded territory, resources, or power. They had not taken revenge. They had not even stayed long enough to claim credit for their victory. They had simply left. And that made the rest of the galaxy very, very afraid. The Xalvath's broken empire. On the former Xalvath homeworld, the once mighty warlords now lived as prisoners in their own cities. Human ships had arrived, not as conquerors, but as stabilizers. They had set up food distribution, rebuilt destroyed infrastructure, and helped civilians recover. They had even given full control of the planet back to the local governments. Warlord Karath, the former leader of the Xalvath military, could not comprehend it. They do not act like victors. They do not claim spoils. What kind of species wins a war and asks for nothing in return? One of his former generals, a broken-looking warrior named Gorath, muttered, "Perhaps they do not see us as a threat anymore." Karath felt his chest tighten. That thought terrified him more than anything. A visit to Earth. With no choice but to find answers, the coalition sent a small delegation to Earth. Ambassador Rylos led the mission. He had expected a planet of fortresses and war machines, a world preparing for the next great conflict. Instead, he found something completely different. Earth was peaceful. Cities were full of life and music. People laughed, worked, and celebrated their victory, not as conquerors, but as survivors. There were no massive war monuments, no grand military parades. The humans were not preparing for another war. They were simply living their lives. Rylos was taken to a meeting with Earth's leaders. He sat across from President Elias Carter, a calm-faced human with kind but calculating eyes. The ambassador took a deep breath. "We do not understand you." Carter smiled. "You're not the first to say that." Rylos leaned forward. "Why did you not take the Xalvath territories? Why did you not punish them? Why did you not demand anything for your victory?" The human leader folded his hands. "Because we never wanted a war." Rylos blinked in confusion. "Then why did you fight like that?" Carter's expression darkened. "Because once we fight, we make sure it never happens again." The silent threat. The delegation left Earth with more questions than answers. Some members of the coalition were relieved. Humanity did not seem interested in conquest. Others were terrified. If humans ever saw a true enemy again, what would they do? One thing was clear. No one wanted to find out. The lesson was simple. Humanity was not interested in ruling the galaxy. But if anyone dared to threaten them again, they would not just win. They would end the war before it even began. The war was over, but the fear remained. Humanity had destroyed the Xalvath Dominion in just 5 hours. No one could believe it, yet it had happened. The greatest military force in the galaxy had fallen, and the humans had walked away without claiming a single reward. Now the rest of the galaxy faced a difficult question. Do we trust humanity, or prepare for them? The hidden debate. On the capital planet of the Galactic Coalition, leaders from hundreds of species gathered for a secret meeting. The room was filled with tension. The defeat of the Xalvath had changed everything. The old balance of power was gone. Ambassador Rylos stood at the center of the chamber. "We must decide what comes next. Humanity is the greatest military power in the galaxy, and yet, we know almost nothing about them." Senator Yilzor, the feathered diplomat from the Avian Confederacy, clicked his beak. "They do not act like conquerors. Perhaps they are truly peaceful." Ambassador Gorthak, the four-armed Ruvax warrior, let out a deep growl. "That is exactly what makes them dangerous. A conqueror fights for gain. A warrior fights only when necessary. And when warriors fight, they do not stop until the enemy is gone." A nervous silence filled the room. Then a representative from the Koran trade union spoke up. His species, a group of amphibian-like merchants, had always avoided war. The humans are powerful, but they are not expansionist. They won the war, yet they asked for nothing. Asterisk, asterisk. Senator Yilzar nodded. Then we should welcome them as allies. But Gorthak slammed his fist on the table, or prepare for them as an enemy. The debate had begun. Earth's watchful eyes. While the coalition argued, humanity was watching. Deep within Earth's war command, Admiral Vasquez stood before a massive holographic display, analyzing reports from across the galaxy. Her second-in-command, Commander Liu, frowned. The coalition is afraid of us. Vasquez smirked. Good. Liu hesitated. Do you think they'll move against us? Vasquez shook her head. Not yet. They're too divided. Some want us as allies. Others see us as a threat. But that's exactly why we can't be predictable. She turned to the room full of intelligence officers. Continue our operations. Listen to their debates. If they plan anything against us, we'll know first. Liu nodded. And if they do move against us? Vasquez's eyes darkened. Then we remind them why the war only lasted 5 hours. The galaxy's first move. The coalition was divided, but some species were unwilling to take risks. A secret alliance, known as the Veil Pact, was formed between 3 powerful species. The Bruvax clans, fierce warriors who saw humanity as an unstoppable force. The Zithar Imperium, an empire of cold, calculating strategists. The Xilori Consortium, a hidden intelligence network specializing in covert operations. Their goal, to find humanity's weakness. They could not afford a direct war, not after seeing what happened to the Xalvoth. Instead, they would use espionage, sabotage, and misinformation to weaken Earth's position before it was too late. Their first plan was simple: send spies to infiltrate human society and learn their secrets. The spies among us. On Earth, the first wave of Veil Pact spies arrived in secret. Disguised as traders, diplomats, and scientists, they blended into human cities, studying their technology, their culture, and most importantly, their military capabilities. One such spy, a Xilori operative named Vectan, had spent weeks observing human society. He had expected a highly militarized world, full of soldiers and war factories. But what he found confused him. Yes, humans had advanced weapons. Yes, their military was deadly beyond imagination. But most of their world was focused on peace. Cities were full of art, music, and laughter. People spent time with family and friends. They did not live in fear. How could a species so dangerous be so normal? Vectan sent his report back to the Veil Pact. Humanity is not preparing for war. The response came immediately. That is the problem. Keep watching. An unexpected encounter. One night, Vectin found himself in a small human bar, watching the people around him. A human man sat next to him, holding a drink. You look like someone with a lot on his mind. Vectin hesitated. His disguise was perfect. He appeared no different from the many alien visitors on Earth, just thinking about the future. The man smiled. Funny thing about the future, you never know what's coming. Vectin studied him carefully. There was something off about him. Then the man leaned in, his voice lowering. Tell your friends in the Veil Pact to stop wasting their time. We already know who you are. Vectin froze. His cover had been blown. Before he could react, the man set down his drink and stood up. If you want to know humanity's secret, I'll tell you. He turned, giving Vectin one last glance. We don't start fights, but when we finish them, they stay finished. Then he walked away, leaving the spy with one terrifying realization. The humans had known about them from the beginning. A dangerous game. Vectan's report sent shockwaves through the Veil Pact. The humans knew they were being watched. They had let it happen, and that meant only one thing. Humanity was watching them back. The galaxy had believed they were studying humanity, preparing for the next move. But in reality, humanity had already made theirs. And now, the Veil Pact had to ask themselves a terrifying question. Had they just made the greatest mistake in galactic history? The galaxy had tried to study humanity. They had sent spies, formed secret alliances, and debated whether humans were friends or enemies. But now, one thing was clear. Humanity already knew everything. And now, they were about to make their move. The Veil Pact's desperation. The leaders of the Veil Pact, the hidden alliance formed in fear of humanity, held a final emergency meeting. Ambassador Zorlak of the Zithar Imperium slammed his claws on the table. The spies have been compromised. The humans knew about them from the beginning. Warlord Cathar of the Bruvax clans growled in frustration. This is worse than we thought. They are watching us, studying us, just as we studied them. Agent Vectan, the spy who had barely escaped Earth, spoke in a cold voice. They were never afraid of us. We were never a threat to them. A heavy silence filled the chamber. For years, the Tsalvoth Dominion had been the strongest military force in the galaxy. They had waged war, crushed planets, and ruled through fear. Then humans came. And in just 5 hours, they had wiped the Tsalvoth from history. The Veil Pact had assumed that the humans had some hidden weakness, that their power was a result of some great secret. But after months of watching, they had found nothing. No weaknesses, no hidden tricks. Just one terrifying truth. Humanity was simply that good. The silent message. Suddenly, every screen in the Veil Pact's meeting room flickered on. A single message appeared. We see you. The room fell into stunned silence. Before anyone could react, the screens changed again, showing live footage of Veil Pact warships, secret bases, and classified communications. Someone had hacked their systems. And then, a voice, calm, collected, and undeniably human, spoke through the room's speakers. You wanted to know our secrets. You wanted to see what we were hiding. The Veil Pact leaders held their breath. There are no secrets. The footage changed again, showing a live view of a massive fleet, human warships, hundreds of them. If you fear us, that is your choice. The screen went black. But understand this, we are not your enemy, unless you make us one. The message ended. No threats, no ultimatums, just a simple statement. And somehow, that was more terrifying than anything else. The galaxy's decision. Word of the human message spread like wildfire. Some species, like the Avian Confederacy and the Coran Trade Union, immediately called for peace. Humanity does not seek war, they argued. We should welcome them as allies. But others, like the Bruvax clans, hesitated. They are too powerful. If they ever turn against us, nothing will stop them. For weeks, the galaxy held its breath. Would the coalition unite with humanity, or would fear push them toward war? The answer came in the form of a single action. Earth's final offer. A grand meeting was held on Earth, attended by every major species in the galaxy. President Elias Carter stood before them, his expression calm. The war against the Tsalvoth is over. We are not here to conquer, rule, or demand tribute. He paused. We are here to offer something else. A map of the galaxy appeared behind him. A new alliance. Gasps echoed through the hall. Carter continued. For too long, the galaxy has been divided by fear. We have seen the destruction war brings. We have seen what happens when the strong prey on the weak. He looked at each leader. It ends today. A new proposal was made. The Galactic Accord. A united defense force, with humanity as its guardian, not ruler. A promise that no species would ever face the terror of another Tsalvoth war. The room was silent. Then, one by one, the leaders stood and accepted. The Veil Pact dissolved that very night. And for the first time in history, the galaxy had true peace. The final warning. As the meeting ended, Ambassador Rylos approached President Carter. "You truly never wanted war?" Rylos asked. Carter smiled. "War is always a failure of diplomacy." Rylos hesitated. "Then why did you destroy the Xalvoth so completely?" Carter's expression darkened. "Because when diplomacy fails, we make sure it never fails again." Rylos shivered. Humanity had not fought for power. They had fought to end war itself. And they had won. The legacy of humanity. Decades later, history would remember this moment as the turning point of the galaxy. The species that had once been feared became the great protectors. And in every corner of space, there was a simple saying: "Do not make humanity your enemy." Because if you did, the war would not last long. It would be over before it even began. Just like last time.